Thank you very much, Excellencies. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for showing up at this opening session of today's events. I think last night was fantastic, and it'll be a hard act to follow. However, I am joined by no less than 7 Excellencies and myself for what was almost a micro summit of the African Union and less so a panel. If I have ever seen magic, it is in Africa, and there is no doubt of this continent's wonderful qualities. However, with these qualities is a serious amount of responsibility and work to do to capture this continent's immense potential. Africa is undergoing its fastest period of growth. 1.5 billion people with a median age of 19 can serve to be the engine of future economic growth. As this rare engine of demand, Africa poses so many opportunities, but also threats. And I'm joined here by a very august group of experts and ministers to talk through this change. I'm joined first of all by Dr. Mohammed Ahmed Nabil, the Minister of Higher Education of the Republic of Djibouti, His Excellency Abdussalam Abdi Ali, the Foreign Minister of Somalia, Her Excellency Christina Duarte, the UN Special Advisor on Africa, Her Excellency Lalla Assia bin Saleh, the itinerant ambassador of His Majesty King Mohammed VI, the Honorable James Quayson, the Deputy Foreign Minister of Ghana, and lastly but not least, His Excellency Mamadou Tangara, Head of the AU Mission for Mali and the Sahel. We are going to discuss the emerging threats and also the possibilities for Africa, strengthening sovereignty and enhancing governance at a time when there is particular risk of fragmentation in what is one of the world's most interesting continents. Your Excellency, I know you have to leave because you're going to meet the Moroccan Foreign Minister in Rabat, so I will open with you. Somalia in recent years has been very aggressively and loyally pursuing regional integration and cooperation. What does this mean for economic resilience?
Thank you so much, and it's a great honor to be here this morning and to be a part of this panel. And also I want to thank MEDays Forum for holding this and bringing all this expertise together so we can have an open dialogue and discussions about Africa that we love. Your Excellency, you're right, Somalia is coming back on the world stage after 3 decades of civil war and terrorist. Somalia is coming back on the national stage. When it comes in the security section, as you know, Your Excellency, the government of Somalia have succeeded to fight against terrorism and take it back a lot of territories from Al-Shabaab. For that reason, Somalia get access to redevelop and economically to come back with new integration. And as you're aware of, we have succeeded to start our first initial oil exploration in Somalia. We will have a big announcement coming very soon when it comes to the mineral resources of Somalia. Also, to get stability and governance, Somalia has had free elections for the last 25 years since the Arta conference have succeeded 2000. It was a long journey of the third government of Somalia to establish 2000, and we appreciate our brothers in Djibouti, especially the president of Djibouti, Ismail Omar Guelleh, to bring back Somalia together 2000. And after that, things were going on the right direction when it comes to elections, when it comes to political stability. And right now is the first time that Somalia will have one man, one vote elections. We already start our local elections yesterday, and also by the end of December, the local elections of Mogadishu, the region of Banadr, will be held, and then we will be going through all over the country to people after more than half a century to have one man, one vote. So that stability brings more and more investors on board. It brings education back. It brings real estate and infrastructure back. And I think so Somalia is now a lot of international states, including UN Security Council. And we see this transition as a winning stage of all African nations. Actually, a well-governed and a stable Africa is a winning Africa. And that's exactly what we are going through as a Somalia government. Still, we have a lot of challenges in front of us, and those challenges will be always as an opportunity for our nation and the Horn of Africa and the rest of Africa. Thank you so much.
Sir. Definitely a huge round of applause for what's been a very difficult set of circumstances that Somalia has made the best from. And we hopefully will see you as Minister of Oil when the oil is discovered. To follow up from that, you mentioned elections, sir, but what other institutional reforms have you made as a state, given that the post-conflict challenges that you've had and the fragmentation of the state previously?
And one of the first things we did for the last 3 years is to review the Constitution. Our Constitution was established 2012 and did not being completed. So the Somali Parliament have started and succeeded to review the Constitution. And I think so the first 4 chapters of the Constitution has been completed, and the rest is going to be completed second. The second thing, which everything starts, is the stability and the security of the country. That has been really a good momentum, and we have retake and establish the Somali government many territories that the terrorist group has been controlling for the last 10, 15 years. And the third thing is political stability. As you're aware of, Somalia used to have multiple changes of prime ministers and governance that has been in the past. Right now we have a consistency more than almost 4 years with the same government that leads the country on the right direction. And also, the other one is that investment. Somalia has been always talk about piracy and feminine and drought and aid, but right now the story is different. We are looking for a mutual and strategic partnerships who will help the country to rebuild, and those investments will bring more jobs, and more jobs will bring more security. Thank you so much.
Very much, sir, and very inspiring, I must say, given the challenges that you faced. Honorable Deputy Foreign Minister of Ghana, we spoke earlier about your political thoughts. You have had a huge breadth of experience across government and international organizations. You've seen the development banks. You've seen how Africa barters for its future on the world stage. I'm sure you have views about the financing that African states need, and we can get onto that. But my question to you, sir, is with divergent political movements and models emerging in West Africa, how can West Africa maintain a coherent framework that protects its stability and unity? We're talking about a part of the world that's the size of the United States.
Thank you, and good morning to everyone. Pleased to be part of this panel. First and foremost, I want to extend our gratitude to Your Majesty, the King, Mohammed VI. I also want to thank the forum, the organizers. To your question, it's very important that West Africa, as you indicated, is an emerging economy, a new democracy. Majority of the countries have just enjoyed democracy in the last 30 years or less. Particularly, we're working under the framework of the AU, which is African Union. This is an organization that was founded in the 60s, And I think due to uncertainties and political upheavals and military interventions, we've come back to realization that this is a time for us to move forward. Sovereignty, political sovereignty in itself alone is not sufficient. It just doesn't give you the independence to manage your society. So for recent times, particularly I can make reference to my country, Ghana, that we're making a major reforms. We've tabled what we call the resetting of the Ghanaian society and economy, politically and economically. There's so many times we have been relying on our raw natural resources for exports. And we've taken a whole new bold approach that henceforth in the region, we are going to focus on adding value to our natural resources. For that matter, we are opening our economies to investors to bring in manufacturing industries. Also, we are looking at the African Continental Free Trade Area, which will enable investors to know that the market is not limited to a particular country, let's say Ghana, for instance. As my earlier panel discussed that we have about 1.5 billion population. You made reference that Ghana, Africa is about the size of, you mentioned United States, correct? But not in population. US population is just about 350 million. Africa stands tall at 1.5 billion, almost the population of the whole of India. So this is a large consumer market that any investor, any serious investor should not be limited to bring their resources or investment to build the economy. So I urge all the international banks to reevaluate their borrowing practices and look at how best the resources can, the investments can come into Africa and create the industries that we need. We need areas like transportation, not to build our road networks. We need railways. We need steady flow of electricity. There's a whole school of areas that investors can come in, and I think we are determined that we are not going back to the old order. We have a vibrant youth population that we need to fulfill to make sure they have employment. And that's, I think, what I would add to it for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. For clarity, I meant West Africa was the size of the United States. Looking from Mauritania through to Guinea, it's a huge swathe of land with so much opportunity. Lella Asia, you spoke very passionately about what it is that you wanted to come across in this panel. You're very motivated as to looking at African solutions to African problems. Our question to you, madam, is how are the challenges facing Africa reflective of the wider global challenges? You've also spoken about the debt squeeze and the risk of fragmentation in Africa. And what are the solutions that Africa faces as it emerges?
Good morning, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Hi, Zaid. Africa is transitioning from resilience, which means surviving shocks, to strategic autonomy. This is the ambition. The micro is not functioning. No, it's on. It's on, but it's probably somewhere else. Is it better? Okay, thank you. Well, I just said that Africa is transitioning from narrative of resilience, which means just to survive shocks, to one of strategic autonomy, which is the ambition to define its own future. My question is to this very ambitious title, and how do you move from emerging to winning? I think this is the global challenge that we have to face. And I think that the African narrative must shift from potential to implementation and address the priorities of economic sovereignty, service delivery, and industrialization. So allow me, if you want me to see what are the appropriate tools to achieve such mighty aims, are the doubting questions. So along reviewing the key issues, I wish to propose a few appropriate operational recommendations to decision makers, focusing on these 3 actionable points mentioned in the title. First, champion smart sovereignty. Everybody knows that sovereignty is no longer just political, but it is intertwined with economic, which means strategic non-alignment and economic agency is what Africa is ambitioning. So geopolitical first, it is choosing active non-alignment, which means that it is giving a signal of structural shift in global governance and participation with the BRICS and with the siege of G20 in Africa. But how far can Africa leverage the multipolar world to increase its bargaining power? We do know that Africa is really the playground of savage rivalry between all the powers, great, medium, and even small ones. So non-alignment is now active and transactional, not passive. African states are increasingly refusing to pick sides, like we have seen in Ukraine and Gaza, for instance, to allow nations to purchase security or potential security from Russia, infrastructure from China, and aid perhaps from the EU. Sovereignty experiences the economic pivot as well define control over value chains. These should start perhaps with more balanced partnerships, which Africa is seeking in this interdependent world, mean as well to choose and negotiate your own dependencies. But we know that this is very difficult because we can see it from the summit between European Union and African Union, that the youth shows that it is still a lot of shortfalls that we have to overcome, as was seen by the generation youth, about all the shortfalls of this unbalanced and asymmetric partnership. So non-alignment is now transactional, not passive, and we are increasingly picking up in conflicts, as I said. So we have to advocate for local content units in all FDIs deals, do not accept loans or investment for extraction without a binding clause for technology transfer. Resource nationalism and for critical minerals are gaining ground. Africa holds, as we know, 30% of the world's mineral reserves, but still we see that a few states are taking the banning on raw exports for lithium, for instance, and strategic projects, as is doing Zimbabwe, Namibia, and Tanzania, with the strategic risk that we can see more new scramble for Africa between the US and the EU in the corridor, for instance, initiative, Lobito, and sovereignty requires managing this partnership with skillful and caution. Second, we have to use African tools and capitalize on success stories. Africa must trust Africa, as His Majesty the King Mohammed VI said. So here, the value-added imperative can be to move from being the pit of the world to being the factory of the green transition. We still see, unfortunately, that 71% of African export to the EU, for instance, are raw materials. So we need green industrialization, as the youth have requested. Africa must leverage the global decarbonization agenda to industrialize, as rightly claimed. So energy sovereignty is a prerequisite. When Africa uses its gas reserve to transition. And from words to concrete actions, I could tell you about our experience in the Malabo-Montpellier Forum, I have the honor to chair, and I'll be ready to answer your questions because we are working hard to implement the transformation of our food systems in Africa, thanks to 17 scientists from 5 key areas of food security across the 54 countries in Africa, Africa learning from Africa and from research and innovation, and this is rather a good, really news. Second, the African Continental Free Trade Act as the sovereign economic engine. It can be the primary tool for economic sovereignty. Even still, it's extremely modest. Intra-continental trade is really, really modest, but it can become this. Winning means moving from ratification to trading. The guided trade initiative must scale up. Success depends on Made in Africa branding, as creating regional value chains. We see this in automotive in Morocco and South Africa, for instance, textiles in Kenya and Ethiopia. And we can operationalize this free trade agreement via logistics, prioritize the hardware of trade. Sovereignty is theoretical without connectivity. We do know, unfortunately, that a truck currently spends more time at customs borders than on the road. We cannot win economically if we cannot move goods internally. Last but not least, in this sovereign package, re-engineer the financial architecture is absolutely critical for success. Macro recovery versus debt crisis. Africa is the second fastest growing region globally, yet 50% of low-income countries are in or near debt distress. We are spending 74 billion on the service debt, up from only 17 in 2010, at the expense, of course, of education, health, and it is threatening social contract. Despite this dim global context, we can see we have to support the African Union's push to reform at the IMF and World Bank. We have to negotiate the debts for rescheduling, advocate for reduction in the African risk premium, which is really unfair and surcharge compared to the same fundamentals across the world.
Thank you.
Put an end to the development. I'm coming very briefly to the conclusion. And of course, we can give as well, the example of Casa Finance City, which is trying to integrate the sector, the financial private sector, in order to address the investments for Africa. Strengthening governance, we have to overcome the delivery crisis. We do know the decoupling between democracy and delivering. So we have really to a few institutional bright spots, as we have said. We still have to use the dividend, the demographic dividend, to overcome versus demographic disaster, and of course through job creation and manage it properly. Ensuring stability, we have to overcome the metastasizing of the threat, as we have just seen in Guinea-Bissau yesterday. So asymmetric warfare, climate security nexus, stability is really still the tricky problem in Africa. And they think to overcome this, we can, of course, to solve the debt crisis in order to overcome the development gap and deliver for the youth and for the population.
Thank you.
And we can learn from the bright spots as well in Africa, like from the integration of Atlantic Africa. I will have the pleasure to speak about this afternoon, and I hope you'll be numerous to come and listen. Sorry to be late.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for that magisterial overview of the challenges the continent faces and for being so thorough in your remarks. We're just going to break for 1 second to let the Foreign Minister of Somalia get to his meeting in Rabat. Thank you, sir. Bon voyage. Thank you all for being so patient. Your Excellency, Mohammed Ahmed Nabil, of course, you will speak in French. As Education Minister of the Republic of Djibouti, your work is not easy. My mother used to tell me, if you become a powerful man, somebody will take your power. If you become a wealthy man, somebody can take your wealth. If you become an educated man, nobody can take your education. This, I think, is so pertinent in Africa, where education can really empower individuals. What have you done in French as Education Minister of Somalia, Djibouti, in ensuring that your country increases its knowledge ecosystem, and more importantly, how it uses this to retain its sovereignty and indeed expand upon this?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Je voudrais tout d'abord remercier le Royaume du Maroc et Amadeus pour cette invitation et l'opportunité de nous donner la parole en tant qu'Africains. Avant de répondre à votre question, je voudrais rebondir sur ce que vous avez posé comme question. Quel avenir pour l'Afrique? Vous avez parlé de problèmes de gouvernance, vous avez parlé de problèmes de développement. Madame Alaoui, comme le Premier ministre somalien, ont donné leur avis. Je pense que j'ai circulé pas mal dans la salle hier et j'ai eu à constater que beaucoup de réponses sont apportées par des Africains pour des problèmes africains. Donc nous avons les solutions. Qu'est-ce qui empêche que nous le réalisons et que nous participions à notre développement? Le gros problème que nous avons, c'est un morcellement de l'Afrique dû à l'histoire, à son histoire économique, sociale, culturelle. Et on voit les pays qui sont en train de se développer, d'autres qui ont des conflits. Qu'est-ce qu'on peut apporter les uns pour les autres? L'élément essentiel, c'est la paix et la stabilité dans un pays. On ne peut pas avoir de développement si on n'a pas de paix et de stabilité. Cette paix doit être construite. Tout à l'heure, le Premier ministre somalien citait l'exemple de l'aide qu'a apporté Djibouti à la Somalie. En 2007, effectivement, le président H.E.Mr a eu cette initiative d'inviter les Somaliens. Il y avait plus de 3000 Somaliens qui ont été invités et de les laisser dans une salle débattre de leurs problèmes pour arriver à construire un État. Et cette main tendue, je dirais, est très profitable également pour Djibouti parce que si vous avez une stabilité dans votre région, vous pouvez penser développer local et penser régional. Sinon, vous ne pouvez pas y arriver parce que les conflits sont de toute façon transportés vers chez vous. Ça, c'est un premier élément. Le deuxième élément, cette paix, je pense que l'Afrique, étant la terre d'origine de l'humanité, peut apporter de l'humanité dans un pays, dans un monde qui se déshumanise. Mais cela ne veut pas dire que dans un monde qui est devenu transactionnel, l'humanité en elle-même suffise. Je pense qu'il faudrait également, grâce à un certain nombre d'initiatives, et hier, beaucoup de participants, de panélistes ont parlé de la zone de libre-échange. Et je pense que la zone de libre-échange est un élément important parce que si on arrive à concrétiser sur un marché de 1,5 milliard d'habitants cette possibilité de faire la plus grande zone de libre-échange, on peut développer nos pays, sortir de la pauvreté, et on estime à peu près à 3 400 milliards de dollars qui peuvent être générés par cette zone de libre-échange. Maintenant, j'arrive à votre question. Quand vous parlez de zone de libre-échange, il vous faut des infrastructures, il vous faut des investissements, il vous faut des industries. Il faut former les gens pour cela. Et si vous n'avez pas les capacités humaines pour relever ces défis, vous aurez toujours tendance à apporter des expertises qui ne vous apportent rien, forcément, parce que ce sont des expertises, les experts arrivent, vous pondent un produit et repartent. Donc, il faut de façon, je dirais souvent, et je vais vous donner un exemple très précis, travailler de façon décomplexée, en disant que l'Afrique peut arriver. Vous savez, je cite souvent, parce que j'en suis fier aussi, cet exemple de dire que Djibouti a lancé 2 satellites. Et quand cette idée nous est venue, Bien sûr, les parlementaires djiboutiens me disaient, mais Monsieur Nabil, vous faites rêver les gens, mais nous avons tant de problèmes à côté, de problèmes d'eau, de problèmes. Je disais, mais il y a un ministre de l'eau pour ça. Comment faire que notre population se dise, aujourd'hui nous sommes capables de lancer des satellites fabriqués par des Djiboutiens, avec une expertise étrangère, bien sûr. Donc c'est se donner les capacités de se projeter sur un avenir lointain et non pas rester sur des schémas décrits qui nous viennent malheureusement, encore une fois, et je pense qu'il faut avoir l'honnêteté de le dire, de la Banque mondiale ou d'ailleurs. Les solutions africaines aujourd'hui, je pense que si on fait l'évaluation et la progression de nombre de personnes, des chercheurs, des intellectuels africains, je pense que l'Afrique, depuis les indépendances, n'a jamais eu autant d'intellectuels, autant des gens formés qui sont capables de promouvoir cette Afrique, Mais nous devons également tout faire pour que ces gens restent et leur donner les opportunités d'avoir les moyens de développer leur recherche, d'enseigner, de leur donner les infrastructures nécessaires. Et c'est pour ça, par exemple, que nous avons créé, et je vous vois prendre le micro, mais j'insiste pour parler d'exemples précis, parce qu'on ne peut progresser que si on apporte des exemples précis sur la réussite de ce que pourrait être l'Afrique. Je parlais tout à l'heure de la paix que nous avons initiée avec nos frères somaliens, mais également cette possibilité, nous avons lancé un projet qui s'appelle l'Alliance doctorale pour l'adaptation au climat. Djibouti aujourd'hui donne des bourses pour tous les pays de la région, Somalie, Éthiopie, Ouganda, pas l'Érythrée pour l'instant. En tout cas, une partie des pays qui sont autour de nous, dans l'IGAD. Et c'est donner l'opportunité d'optimiser nos moyens pour faire de la recherche de qualité et donner des bourses sur des problématiques précises. Chacun de ces doctorants, de ces masters va travailler sur des zones précises dans le pays, pas pour faire uniquement de la recherche, mais que pour notre recherche impacte sur la population. Et donc, pour revenir à votre question, il ne s'agit plus de rester sur des modèles éducatifs, je dirais, classiques, mais je parlerai tout à l'heure du numérique si vous me donnez l'opportunité, mais c'est de réfléchir local, tout en développement se mettre dans un développement régional et dans des perspectives internationales. Et je pense aujourd'hui, nous avons tous les moyens pour y arriver.
Can we have a round of applause just for that beautiful French that we just heard? For any Moroccans who still insist on speaking in French, unless it's like His Excellency, don't bother. Honestly, it was just beautiful masterclass in the French language, sir. To follow up, you spoke about the brain drain and supporting doctorate students in Africa. This may be relevant for you in Djibouti as it is in Morocco. For us, education came from Cairo, it came from Baghdad, then it came from Paris, and now it comes from Silicon Valley. And I speak exclusively of Fes, which was a center of learning, and the only large center of learning from here all the way to Al-Azhar in Cairo. How do we mitigate this so that we are no longer importing education and adopting it? I'm sure you've had a similar experience historically in Djibouti.
Nous ne vivons pas dans un milieu fermé, ça c'est sûr. Je pense que la connaissance existe, la technologie est bien développée, pas uniquement dans les pays occidentaux, mais aujourd'hui en Chine. Je pense qu'il faut citer également les pays en Inde. Je pense qu'il y a aussi d'autres partenariats aujourd'hui. Nous échangeons beaucoup avec le Maroc, où nous avons plus de 1000 étudiants. Je disais hier à votre ministre, avant-hier, à votre ministre de l'Enseignement supérieur qui m'a reçu à Rabat, le Maroc nous inspire. Il nous inspire, bien sûr, par sa stabilité. Et cette stabilité, je dirais, alhamdoulilah, nous l'avons également à Djibouti. Mais par sa capacité de créer des centres d'excellence. Et aujourd'hui, ces centres d'excellence autorisent le Maroc d'avoir ses meilleurs polytechniciens qui se trouvent en France, par exemple, et dans les meilleures écoles. Et je pense que c'est un exemple à suivre. C'est un exemple également, cette connaissance, comment faire rentrer, et votre question est importante, parce que nous avons beaucoup des talents qui travaillent dans la Silicon Valley, qui travaillent en Occident, qui travaillent maintenant de plus en plus aussi dans d'autres pays. Comment faire que ces talents rentrent pour apporter cette expertise, nous enrichir et aller de l'avant. Donc, je pense qu'il n'y a pas une recette construite, mais il y a une progression dans l'évolution du monde. Je parlais tout à l'heure d'un monde transactionnel, j'aime pas trop ces mots. Mais dans le mot transactionnel, moi je vois qu'est-ce que je peux donner et qu'est-ce que je peux recevoir. Et dans la connaissance, et l'islam nous a toujours, si je peux citer notre chère religion, nous a toujours poussé à la connaissance, à éviter les extrémismes et à construire dans un monde de paix et de solidarité.
Yes, thank you very much, sir. Thank you, thank you. We've heard from the government voices now. Now it's to hear from the United Nations and from the African Union. Your Excellency, Mamadou, they say the only predictable thing about Africa is its unpredictability. And I wondered where you work, and given your experience, what can the African Union do to mitigate these challenges? And if you have something to lead on from education, which I think is a very important opening of this session, that would be a nice continuation. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would want to thank and congratulate Amadeus Institute for organizing this beautiful event. I've been participated in this event for many years in different capacities, but today I'm here, and I am not going to speak as special rep of the African Union or head of Miss Sahel, but I'm going to speak as a free individual. And I will take it from where my brother Nabil landed, because in another life I was a minister of higher education too. And I've been always saying that one of the most important ministries in developing countries, especially in Africa, is the Ministry of Education, especially higher education. And I always like to quote Bolivar when he said that las naciones marchan con el mismo paso que camina su educación superior. If I want to translate it in bad French, que la marche des nations est dictée par la cadence de leur politique d'enseignement supérieur. But when you look at higher education in Africa, and education in general, most of the time, we know more about others than ourselves. Because even to develop our curriculum, the curricula, we rely on partners to give us money to develop the curriculum, which is very unfortunate. Because if you give me your money, of course, you will not allow me to put whatever I want there. I have some Senegalese friends in the hall, and I think Gambians. We used to say that when you borrow someone's eyes, you look in the direction that he wants. Quand tu empruntes les yeux de quelqu'un, tu regardes dans la direction qu'il préfère. So asking support from others, we tend to learn more about them than about ourselves. And I always give example when it comes, for example, issues of human rights. You know, usually partners will always use that as a dangling carrot to get support that we are not respecting human rights, you are doing X, Y, and Z. But when you refer to human rights, we usually refer to Magna Carta, la Déclaration Universelle de 1789. But I say in Africa, we have the Fitaneges in Ethiopia, the Kebraneges. You have the Charter of Kurukan Fugan. But not many Africans know about them. And I was participating in one of the AU summit, and I'm seeing in the hall my brother Alaji Mumini. I started as a young foreign minister. He was my colleague. When we had a summit talking about shared values in Africa, and I was wondering, which values are we sharing? Because most of the values we know, we take them from others. So it's fundamental for us if we want to leapfrog. You know, we were in Korea for the Africa-Korea Summit, and everyone was praising the hang-like river development. But that did not happen out of a vacuum. It happened when King Sejong in Korea decided to create some kind of epistemological break by introducing the teaching of the Korean language And people started seeing themselves through their own eyes, not through the distorted prism of others. And I think this debate we've been having for many years about Africa emerging, Africa winning, Africa the continent of the future, but that cannot happen unless and until we take the driver's seat, and unless and until we have peace and stability. If you don't have peace and stability, there is no way you can have development. It's not possible. The nexus security. And I'm coming from Mali, from Bamako. Today, when you listen to the news, you think that tomorrow Bamako will be taken over. I'm coming from there. Sometimes I wonder which Bamako are they talking about. It's true that we have challenges, but it's not like the way it's being portrayed. And I think talking about the Sahel, it's important for Africans to understand that our destinies are interlinked, interconnected. And today we are all duty bound to make sure that we fight effectively terrorism, not to allow them to have a base in any of those countries. Because if that happens, ça va être comme une digue. The others will follow. They will use that as a basis to destabilize other countries. So we have a duty of solidarity, and I want to commend the government of Ghana. I know the commitment of our president. I've been working with Larry, the special envoy on Sahel. And for Sahel, for example, as we speak, we have more than 158 special envoys and special representatives on Sahel. I'm the only one living in Bamako. So which Sahel are you talking about? You cannot talk about a place when you don't know about the place. But the fundamental thing that Africans must be aware of is that most of those who are pretending to help us are there for their own interests. They're interested in tearing the treasures out of the bowels of our land, and that we must be conscious of that. And as long as we follow orders, one of my boss used to say, when you follow, you are always behind. Quand on suit, on marque les pas derrière. Donc il est important qu'on prenne en main notre destinée, notre destin en main pour qu'on puisse réaliser ce rêve que les pères fondateurs ont depuis très longtemps. And I want to commend the government of Morocco. I'm myself one of the alumni of this country, benefited from a scholarship, came here from the Gambia, an English-speaking country, to learn here. And we've seen the amount of solidarity that Morocco has displayed towards African countries. And today, they've created a pool of potential ambassadors of Morocco who are speaking on behalf of Morocco, because we've been trained here. We know the reality, so there are things that people cannot just come and blindfold us and tell us about. So we want to commend the government, His Majesty the King, for the support, for the solidarity towards Africa. And he has decided to open this corridor in the sub-Saharan, for sub-Saharan Africa. And we've been working in a previous life with the Minister of Foreign Affairs on countries bordering the Atlantic Ocean. Because for far too long we thought that piracy, for example, was a far distant thing, but it's coming closer to home. So we are also duty-bound to pull our resources together to face the challenges together. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Very well said. Thank you so much. Christina, thank you for being so patient. Her Excellency Christina Duarte is the UN Advisor on Africa. She was former Finance Minister of Cape Verde. And it's your experience at the African Union, part of President Kagame's steering committee on reforming the African Union, that I wanted to discuss with you today. How can institutions in Africa, whether they are the UN or the African Union, be rejigged to be more effective in coping with the challenges of today?
Good morning to everybody. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure and honor to be here. All protocols observed. Allow me to use your question to also deliver a couple of ideas on sovereignty. I have to admit that I've been waiting to be invited to a debate, to conversations about Africa's sovereignty in the past 5 years. So I need to grab this opportunity. and I will be very open, and I'll be using my African soul. We need to be honest, we Africans. Everybody in this room knows that Africa's deficit is not a deficit of potential, is not a deficit of resources, is not a deficit of demographic vitality. Africa has a deficit of sovereignty, and this is the challenge. And this deficit of sovereignty is driven by external constraints and internal constraints. External constraints, my dear brother, you said it all. Let me, to complement my dear brother, to focus on the internal constraints. And for me, the number one constraint is our mindset. Our mindset, my dear brother from Djibouti has mentioned. Our mindset, because it touched education, and I'll be getting there. So, when addressing, in my opinion, the sovereignty challenge in Africa, I believe that we need to deal with 4 frontiers, one after another. The first one, as I mentioned, is the mindset challenge, the silent obstacle to sovereignty. And allow me to start with a contradiction that sits at the heart of Africa's development narrative. I have been confronting this contradiction every day in the past 20 years. Africa finances its own development in more than 75%. Believe me, it's not ODA. Believe me, it's not FDI. African resources, schools, roads, hospitals, you name it. Yet, the narrative, the global narrative, picture us as a continent defined by need, not by capacity. The Minister of Education of Djibouti mentioned that. So, and this is not a narrative problem. In my opinion, it is a knowledge problem. Because everybody knows that perception shapes power, as you mentioned in your question. We need to ask, what happens when we internalize a mindset of scarcity? This is our mindset. What happens when every each African internalizes a mindset of scarcity? First, we underestimate our assets, and I will provide numbers. Second, we undervalue our institutions, we over-rely on external solutions, and we design policies with the logic of dependency. So, the mindset, in my view, is the first frontier of sovereignty. We need to break it. We need to get there. Because there is no sovereignty without a sovereign mental model. It doesn't exist. And this mental model needs to be built by the education system, by the education. Then, if you agree with me that mindset is the mindset challenge is the first frontier, the second frontier is the sovereignty of thinking. And here I have a very short message. No sovereignty in Africa without scholarship. It will not happen. If we do not invest on African scholarship, we will not get the sovereignty. So Africa cannot be sovereign if it does not control the knowledge that informs the decision. And we do not. And because the globalization in the last 30 years, the neoliberal thinking has been dominating everybody. So we know. So we know that knowledge shapes policies, policies shape systems, and systems shape destinies. So the second frontier is the scholarship. So that African knowledge is the one that informs policy making in Africa. So if you agree with me, African knowledge is a strategic asset. African knowledge is a strategic asset, not a byproduct of development. No, as we have been putting, but as a precondition for development, which is different. So when African knowledge is marginal, which is a reality today, in Africa decision making, 3 things follow. and we need to be conscious as Africa. First, our development models become external oriented. Who doubts in this room? Second, our intellectual sovereignty is outsourced to global institutions. Third, our policy choices drift away from our structural realities. Then, with that, let's say, second frontier in terms of sovereignty of thinking, allow me to move to the third frontier of sovereignty, which is the sovereignty over economic and financial flows. And I have been Minister of Finance for 10 years. Allow me, Africa has been captured by a finance paradox in the past 50 years.
Just on that, if you can go to the danger of interest rates and in your answer, that would be amazing.
And what happened? Why is Africa unable to exercise economic sovereignty? We don't exercise. Because we do not control our economic and financial flows. And allow me to provide you 2 numbers only, maybe 3 numbers. When we close our business today, only today, Africa will have lost $1.4 billion. Only today. Only. Africa loses on an annual basis $500 billion. Allow me to ask you, or allow me to tell you, as I told to my daughter to explain me, can you lose a mobile if you don't have a mobile? I don't think so. So if Africa loses $500 billion, means that Africa has been able to generate $500 billion. What is the missing piece? Africa has the ability to generate $500 billion, but has the inability to keep it and inject its own development. And this financing paradox, we lose $500 billion, but at the same time, you are a continent, and allow me to be very open, because I'm African, I can be open in this conversation. We beg for ODA. We beg for debt suspensions. We beg for debt reliefs. And this is a paradox that needs to be broken. And this paradox brings to the debt. Exactly. Everybody in this room, I'm sure, that is convinced that the reason of Africa's debt distress is because Africa is over-indebted. Now, may I ask you a favor? Don't buy it. Don't buy. Africa is not over-indebted. Over-indebtedness is not the reason of Africa's debt distress. The reason of Africa's debt distress is because we do not control our economic flows, is because we do not control our financial flows. Allow me to give you a very small example. So we lose on an annual basis $500 billion, which is a flow. We lost in 23, we lost in 24, we are in the process of losing in 25, and you are going to lose the $500 billion in 26. Africa stock, debt stock, external debt public stock to GDP, now the stock is $656 billion, which is a stock number. The 500 is a flow. If we compare, it gives Africa a payback period of 1 year and 2 months. What does that mean? If you give me a magic baton, and I just close my eyes and say, please, Africa, stop losing $500 billion and use all these 500 to pay out the debt. In 1 year, in 2 months, that Africa would be without no debt. Of course, this third frontier of not controlling the flows, what are the results? No fiscal space. Of course, if you don't control your flows, you have no fiscal space. External finance becomes the default solution. Partnerships become asymmetric. Africa becomes a rule taker in the global financial architecture, as everybody knows. And Africa becomes a player in a geopolitical game without mastering the rules. Yes. Now, what we need in this third frontier is to move from a mindset of financing for development driven by ODA to a mindset financing for development driven by domestic resource mobilization, where resources are not tax revenues only. It's land, energy, minerals, biodiversity are assets. And then I move quickly to the fourth frontier.
Christina, we're actually out of time, so just wrap up your comments, please.
The last frontier, and I will just announce it, if we face a sovereignty from a financial and economic flow standpoint, the last frontier is the digital sovereignty. And I will just say three things if you allow me. First, the question of digital sovereignty is that Africa is connected, without. But please do not mix connection with empowerment. We are connected, but you are not empowered. And I would like to say why you are not empowered. Let's see, and I will finish
The second
now.
and third, and as bullet points, what are they?
For example, submarine cables are owned by global telecom giants. Satellite capacity is leased, not sovereign. Hardware and software are imported, often closed source. Cloud ecosystems are external hosted, and our energy systems are too unreliable to sustain a sovereign digital industrial basis. So if you want to tackle sovereignty in Africa, we need to start by changing our mindset and then move on. Thank you.
That was wonderful, really inspiring. Often in Africa, we have something called excellency inflation. Everyone in Africa is important. But today, I was really joined by a veritable group of excellencies. I hope you all see higher leadership in your respective countries. You are inspiring, you are good people. And on the subject of leadership, as a younger African, the fact that there are leaders like Mr. Nabil and leaders who've almost inspired myself, Lalla Asia, who is here, and His Excellency Amr Musa, who is here in the front. Amr, he's there. Throughout my career, you have been at the end of a phone. I'm nobody to you. But when you share your experiences and you're available at the end of a phone, you inspire the next generation. And I cannot tell you how important this is. And to have someone like Mr. Nabil in charge of the education of millions of the future of Djibouti is so inspiring. I hope we see this elsewhere. And the emerging theme from this very complicated panel was education and its importance in building sovereignty. So thank you very much, and let's join each other for a picture.
Dites à votre maman que je vais retenir